Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. On behalf of HSBC, a very, very warm welcome. This is our first Think Bigger Innovation Series event. So my name is Tala Booker. I'm the head of communications for HSBC Australia. That's, of course, my day job. But today, I'm actually going to be your MC and host for what I'm hoping is going to be a very lively discussion. So thank you, everyone, for joining us and dialing in. Before we begin, a couple of comments, if I may. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters from which we are all dialing in from today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past and present. I also acknowledge our attendees who identify as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander and recognize the diversity of First Nations peoples, countries, and culture in Australia. So a couple of opening remarks, if I may. Today's session is going to be set up in three different ways. We're going to hear a keynote presentation from Richard Betts. Richard is the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of Pact Group. Thereafter, I'm absolutely confident we're going to have a very lively discussion with our esteemed panel, which I'll be running as your MC and joined by Richard as well as a few other panelists. So a couple of quick reminders. First and foremost, and it's very apt that today's session is all about tech and innovation, we're going to be fielding your questions live and through the Q&A functionality on the webinar. So remember, ask all the hard-hitting questions. I'm going to field them live. So when you see me looking at the iPad, I promise I'm not just browsing today's news like a news junkie. I'm going to ask you some real questions, all of yours. We're also recording today's discussion, so just a reminder, if we run out of time at all for the live questions, we'll be coming back to all of you with feedback, and of course we'll want to hear your feedback. So please share that with us when we come back to you. So without further ado, I would actually like to introduce HSBC's head of commercial banking, Steve Hughes. He's our head of commercial banking in Australia. He's going to give some opening remarks before we cut to Richard. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Tala, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of HSBC, I would like to welcome you and indeed thank you all for joining us today. This virtual event is the first in a series of innovation webinars designed to bring to life the stories of our corporate customers and share how they've adapted, transformed and innovated during a time of considerable change. To discuss the theme of bigger ideas, today I'm pleased to say we're joined by Anna Karabs, Chief Executive Officer of King Living, Rupesh Singh, Chief Executive Officer of Education Centre Australia, and Richard Betts, who is Chief Financial Officer of Pact Group. If we reflect on the past decade, we all have our own examples of how technology has become a growing presence in our lives, and it is worth reflecting on how during this time successful organisations have adapted and utilised new technologies to continue to evolve and create a better customer experience for all of us. If anything, the last 12 months have accelerated these trends. The obvious one is that we all communicate more digitally on mediums such as Teams and Zoom, which in many cases, like today, has enabled us to communicate more easily across borders. The current global pandemic has, however, also changed what we consume and the channels that we use to buy. To give this some context, a recent report from Deloitte showed that more than half of Australians admit to using smartphones more during the lockdown, and more than a quarter of us bought a new device this year. 73% of households are now shopping online, which has increased the demand for digital payments. In fact, the total transaction value of digital payments in Australia in 2020 is predicted to reach $48 billion. One positive, of course, is that the increased use of flexible working has saved us all, on average, 5.5 hours each week by not commuting to work, which has given us more family time, or perhaps in some cases, more time on Netflix. I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers today, and I'm grateful to Anna, Rupesh and Richard, as senior representatives from the retail, education and manufacturing industries, for sharing the changes they've observed and the challenges they've experienced this year. I'm confident that you'll relate to their experiences and be able to take away some ideas from the successful initiatives they have championed. Again, a big thank you to everyone who is joining us live, and I'm grateful to those of you who responded to our survey earlier this week. Feedback like this helps us ensure that we are focused on the areas that are of interest to you for today's session and other sessions we're planning in the Innovation Series. I can see we have roughly 100 attendees dialed in, and for those who responded to the questions posed, the results align very closely with the recent global survey that HSBC published called Navigator. In that survey, we asked 10,000 business leaders across 39 countries how their business has been responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The responses showed us that 70% of businesses aim to increase investment in 2021, despite the challenging business environment. The top 3 investment priorities in 2021 are improving customer experience, cash flow management, and employee well-being. What was particularly interesting was how these priorities will be achieved, with investing in technologies that help reach the customer, enhance their experience, and improve speed to market for new propositions featuring Harley. Whatever 2021 brings us, one constant will remain. Innovation as a means to adapt and pivot will define which companies survive and which thrive in the new economy. At HSBC, we want to be on this journey with you, so I do hope we can connect with you and discuss how we might be able to help your business achieve its ambition here in Australia, in Asia, or indeed globally. Please enjoy the session today.
Thank you, Steve. I have to admit, mine would have been, those 5.5 hours would have been spent watching Netflix rather than commuting, of course. So let's get started. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce Richard Betts. Richard has been the Chief Financial Officer for Pact Group for the last 6 years. And let me give you some background on Pact. Pact is the largest rigid packaging solutions provider in Australia and New Zealand. And actually, close to HSBC's heart, of course, they have a very growing presence in Asia Pacific. And critically for today, and I think this is why it's going to be so great to hear from Richard, Pact is in the process of transitioning its business to move from a single-use packaging to leading what Richard has called the circular economy through the provision of recycled and reusable packaging solutions. And we have a fair few honourable mentions for Pact. They were recently recognised as one of Australia and New Zealand's most innovative companies. This is actually the 8th consecutive year that they've notched this award from the Australian Financial Review. And very recently, they were also the joint winner of the Best Pandemic Pivot Award. This speaks for itself, but this is for pivoting quickly. They're both their operations at pace and at scale, but really to produce 1 million litres of hand sanitizer per week, which I know has been a huge help, of course, to the Australian society overall. On a personal level, Richard is a chartered accountant with over 20 years of senior financial and commercial experience. He's been at many multinational household companies that we know of. That's Deloitte and Orica. And his career has spanned a number of continents. It's taken him to the US, the UK, Malaysia, but of course, we're very pleased he's back in Australia. So please join me in virtually welcoming Richard Betts. Richard, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Tala, and thank you to Steve for that very kind introduction. Look, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited today to take you on the journey that Pact is embarking as we transition from a single-use plastic packaging provider to what we now term and what Talia mentioned as a leader in the circular economy for plastic packaging. For those people who are not aware of Pact, I've just put a quick slide up here, just gives a quick overview in terms of the company. We are a $1.8 billion packaging solutions company. We employ over 6,000 people across 15 countries, and we have approximately 7,000 customers. And for those of you who aren't aware, just to give you an idea, probably about 25% of any sort of packaging that would sit in your pantry, in your fridge, or indeed in your garage is most likely made by ourselves. We're made up of 3 different businesses. And I'll actually start on the right and finish on the left because the left is what I want to talk to you about today. Our contract manufacturing business is a business that provides product. What we say is rather than the actual packaging, the product that goes inside the packaging. So we have businesses that provide liquids, powders, aerosol products for multinational companies and also for the private label products for Coles, Woolworths and Aldi. So some of the products that you might know, the Aldi laundry powders. We also have a business that provides nutraceutical products for Swiss and other companies. Our second business is a business that is basically a pooling provider. So we provide plastic packaging solutions that are used for pooling. So an example of that is we provide the fresh fruit and produce crates that are used by farmers for Woolworths and also for Aldi in terms of getting their produce into those stores. We then collect those crates, and then we then wash them and then return them back to the farmers in a closed loop. The more exciting part of the journey that I want to talk to you about today is within our $1.2 billion packaging business, core packaging. That is the business that we started over 20 years ago, and it was primarily set up as a single-use provider of packaging. So we make everything from drink bottles to peanut butter jars to any of those sorts of products. But obviously over time, the model around single use is something that has come under significant attention. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is how through innovation and through transition as an organization, we're able to grow and to meet the needs of the community, we hope, going forward. In terms of understanding some of the changes within the plastics industry, I think if everyone would know and is very well and truly aware that if you go back 12 months ago, there was a significant focus on things like plastic straws, banning of plastic bags, the waste being sent off to China. And considerably, there was growing pressure on us as an industry to look at how we could do things differently and what our place was going forward as a packaging company for us as Pact, and more importantly, a packaging industry. So what we did was sat down and looked at what are the trends, what are community expectations, and basically came up with a number of key themes. And those key themes are based around the survey, and some of the results are shown here. But increasingly, the response from the community was that if you were going to use plastic, it must be recyclable. Consumers would pay extra for recycled product. However, Australia must take ownership of its own waste. And so from there, we sat down as an organisation and then looked at what is our position going forward, recognising that us as a single-use provider of plastic packaging was not going to be the future. And I will say that we already had, as part of our organisation, a sustainability business that was recycling about 10% of our volumes today, which still made us the largest recycler in the country, but well below community expectations. So we sat down and we worked through and said, you had a situation where, in terms of changing away from core single-use packaging, you had a situation where basically the consumers were demanding it. Our companies that we supplied and effectively our customers had already made commitments to the general public around their targets going forward. And then more importantly, the government was moving and needing to legislate and to seek change in terms of how the plastics industry could operate. And that therefore came back down to what our place could be in what we term a circular economy. So effectively a model that starts with making product, using that product, and then effectively reusing that through recycling, and then basically continuing through that circular journey. As a company, I think it was important for us, in terms of understanding that circular economy, to understand where we could add value in that chain. And basically, we started with the availability of raw materials. We saw that we added no value in this area. Raw materials were going to be picked up by the curbside collectors, companies like Cleanaway, JJ Richards, and those sorts of companies who were specialists in that area. And we saw that we could add no value in that. However, it was important for us to understand the role they played in managing that circular economy. We then saw there was a whole piece that was all about the recycling of the material. We had expertise in that area, as I said before, but unfortunately we did not have any scale, and we were not able to do this at a level that made it efficient for us over single-use plastics. We're obviously the largest manufacturer of rigid plastics in the country, and so from a customer base, from an overall position in terms of best being able to both utilize any product that came in through recycled or reuse, and being able to supply that to our customers, we had the best position in the market. we were able to create demand and we were able to generate the necessary volume that would allow us, we hope, to be successful in this journey in terms of transferring to. To that point, we then set about and said, what is it that we can do in this space that would effectively allow us to be successful and meet many of the demands and many of the needs of both the consumer and increasingly the regulators in terms of setting up a circular economy. And to date, the best example of how we've actually been able to put this into play is an announcement of a joint venture that we recently established with two of the biggest players in the industry, both from the perspective of the curbside collection and the end use of plastic packaging. And that was a journey whereby basically we got together with Cleanaway and Asahi. And for those who aren't aware, Asahi, whilst we all know them as the beer company, also owns Pepsi, Schweppes, and a number of other significant water brand bottles, and therefore are one of the largest users of plastic packaging in the country. And therefore, we set about looking at how, as a joint venture, we could work together across the three parties and create value for the three of us as organisations, as well as meeting the needs of the consumer and the governments in terms of controlling waste. So most of you would be aware that the container deposit scheme was implemented in New South Wales approximately 2 years ago. Cleanaway manages that. They have the ability to access good quality raw materials, and so their role within the joint venture is to access those raw materials. We then established, being the centre of the second circle, we established or are in the process of establishing a plant in Albury that will cost just over $50 million to build, that will effectively recycle all of that material. Then that raw material will then be used by both Asahi and Pact to meet the needs, firstly, of Asahi in terms of meeting its commitment to getting to a situation where they can say that they are 100% recycled product by 2025. And then any excess commitment out of that plant will be used by Pact and its customers. That joint venture will be run by Pact, and we will maintain and develop the expertise around recycling of the product, and then, as I said, any excess product. To put some scale to this, we will be taking approximately 28,000 tonnes of waste per year and turning that into about 22,000 tonnes of good quality recycled product. That is the equivalent of 1 billion bottles per year. So you can imagine that in an environment where increasingly the consumer was getting concerned about what was happening to this product and whether it got into our waste stream or into our waterways, we've now taken that and have turned that into something that's going to be of value both to ourselves and our joint venture partners. So really, that is, for us, the classic example of the circular economy at work. So where once upon a time, we took virgin resin and then turned that into a bottle that then got used by Asahi and then potentially ended up in waste, will now be a continual loop that basically sees that us and Asahi particularly are able to commit to the consumer that what products we're making are being used and are being effectively used and returned back into the economy on a constant loop through the circular economy. When we sat down and looked at our place and our role in the circular economy, we actually started not from how it affects Pact, but how as an industry we could change, because in itself, us changing in an environment where plastic packaging was going to come under increasing scrutiny, we recognised that the industry needed to change. And we recognised that if the industry could change, our scale and our ability to operate in that industry, we hoped and backed that we would be successful in terms of what we were able to do on the back of changing the industry. So we worked with PwC and we actually built a model around what the impact of basically implementing a local plastic circular economy would be and what that would contribute to Australia. And us ourselves were amazed in terms of what came back in terms of that work. And we believe that if the industry can get this right, and then our place in that would be whatever place we would then have, we believe that this industry can create 16,000 new jobs for Australia. We also believe it can create about $19.3 billion of GDP for the economy. And probably more importantly, it can reduce CO2 emissions by 1.4 million tonnes a year. That's the equivalent of taking 300,000 cars off the road. So you can see that not only are we developing something that is all about us as an organisation changing, it's also about an industry needing to change. Much so in terms of some of the work that we've been doing with the government. The government now has earmarked recycling, and particularly plastics recycling, as one of the 6 key industries that will drive its $1.5 billion fund around modern manufacturing. And so we've gone from a situation where probably 12 to 18 months ago, the government was concerned about Australia not taking responsibility for its own waste issues, to it actually being an industry that it is prepared and wants to fund and wants to develop because of its ability not only to manage and control that waste, but also to create jobs for the community and actually position us in terms of modern manufacturing that can create jobs as well as be beneficial for the economy. In terms of our position within that, I talked earlier about the joint venture with Asahi and with Cleanaway. We actually believe that by 2022, we will actually be in a position where we will have established somewhere in the vicinity of, or our intention is, approximately 5 of these facilities. And that will require significant investment on our part, up to, between the joint venture partners, up to $250 million. That $250 million is part of a $500 million journey that PACT is going on as part of the transition of the circular economy. And I will say, obviously, that requires significant support, requires the support not only of our joint venture partners, the community, the government, but it also requires the support of our bankers. So I will give HSBC a plug here and say we've been looking at some really exciting things as well around how we can finance and how we can drive this development, and looking at a number of financing options, particularly around green bonds and green lending, that will position us as well in terms of being able to meet the needs of the economy, as well as driving at the pace we need to drive. Just in terms of the next level for us as an organisation, I talked about the importance of moving away from single use to recycled. The other thing that we think increasingly that plastics can do is not just provide single use or recycled, but actually move further down the journey to reuse solutions. And increasingly, we're looking at options around plastic packaging solutions that actually allow us to reuse these. And I talked earlier about the crate pooling business. If you think about crate pooling, every time your fruit and vegetables is delivered from farm to the store in one of our crates, we think that crate can go around the cycle anywhere up to 140 times over a 10-year life. Replace that with something like packaging that's in either cardboard or polystyrene, which in the case of polystyrene obviously can't be, or is very hard to reuse, and even cardboard has to be recycled every time. So even from a further energy efficiency, the opportunities to go even further than the circular economy to go to reuse solutions is one that we consistently are looking at what those opportunities are. And so, here's a couple of examples. One, I talked about the crate pooling, but secondly, interestingly enough, all those coat hangers that get thrown into the boxes at the bottom of the store when you go through Big W or Kmart, we actually collect those and reuse those and send those back to the garment manufacturers, whether they be in China or in Bangladesh, and actually maintain a closed loop even in relation to the coat hangers. So that is the other piece too, in terms of what we see as a very important part of the transition for us to the circular economy. I talked about the importance of collaboration. And in terms of, for us, that is a very important part between industry and government. Government will need to play a critical role in this in terms of supporting us and helping us to get there. Moving from old scale manufacturing to modern manufacturing does not come simply and does not come easily. And we are really looking for, and we're working very hard and getting a lot of airtime nowadays with the government around how they can help support us in terms of that transition, in terms of funding, but more importantly, in terms of regulating the needs and meeting the needs of the community around particularly controlling of waste and controlling of what people are doing in terms of behaviours that will allow and support us in terms of moving through that journey. To close this part of the presentation, as Pact, we set ourselves an ambitious goal, which actually started with a goal for the wider plastics industry. We set ourselves, as we talked about, a plan that could create 20,000 jobs within 5 years and generate $23 billion for the economy. And then we worked ourselves backwards in terms of how us as an organisation could play and we could accelerate our growth within that circular economy. But I think in an environment where you're faced with a situation where through changes in consumer behaviour or consumer need, you need to work backwards from an innovation platform and say, what can our industry look like first, and understand what the industry looks like in order for us to then say, where do we need to be and need to play in that space? So I think for us, we started with that as our goal. We think that that is absolutely achievable in terms of being able to bring back manufacturing into this country, do it in a sustainable way, and do it in a way that's healthy and appreciated by society. So I'm extremely excited by the opportunity that HSBC have given us today to tell our story, and happy to take further questions as we go through. But I think the advice for anyone else is, in terms of innovation and moving the dial, you think big, think about the industry, and then look at your place within that. And that's what's so exciting for me, is that it's not just about Pact and its journey. It's about the journey that us as a wider industry can take, but us backing ourselves within that. So I'd just like to turn back to Tala and the team, but thank you for listening to our story today, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Richard, and what a great story that was. And we're looking forward to hearing more as we get through this panel. So I'm sure everybody on the call will join me in saying that that was fascinating insights, and insights, of course, that we look forward to hearing more about. So without further ado, we're actually going to get started with our panel discussion. We have about 30 minutes, and I'm going to do a few introductions to get started. So let's talk through this panel for a moment. We're obviously gathered today to really deep dive and really understand and bring to life stories from successful Australian companies who have innovated. They've adopted new technologies, they've been agile, they've met the needs of their customers, and more importantly than anything, they have succeeded in doing so. So we're going to get through the introduction. As a reminder, I'm the head of communications for HSBC. I'm Tala Booker. I'm the first to admit I'm by no means a technology guru, but there's one thing I hope to be able to do, and that's to get those hard-hitting questions to our esteemed panel and draw out some of those insights about their companies and to really hear their stories. So joining Richard, we're going to start with Anna. So Anna Carabs is the CEO of award-winning Australian-based furniture brand King. So she's been the CEO of King since June 2015. Through her leadership, through her stewardship, the company's gone global. I know we all know King in Australia, but of course it's a global organization. They bring purposeful design, high quality furniture, and they've really been enhancing the way a lot of us live today and of course plan to live, of course, in the future through wherever the pandemic may take us. The company's newest initiative is, it's enhancing our homes and offices, which we spend a ton of time at these days. but it's also benefiting the planet. They have a newly launched digital brand called Design Online. Design Online targets millennials with a range of sustainable furniture that's built for the future, not for the landfill. And I'd like to put a couple of things in Anna's own words. As she says, King are one of the top 5 Australian companies with patents on products, so therefore innovation is absolutely core to everything they do. It is about the product, the people, the service, and importantly about aftercare. So Anna, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Tala.
And next, I'd like to also introduce Rupesh Singh. So Rupesh Singh is the founder and group CEO of award-winning Education Centre for Australia. You'll hear me use the acronym ECA through this panel discussion, so that's Education Centre of Australia. They employ around 600 people around the world. They deliver vocational courses, higher education for something like 8,000 students every year. Rupesh has had some great commercial success in the past. He's worked across corporate development, operations, marketing and sales, banking and finance, and project management. So I'm sure you'll all agree with me that that's quite the pedigree when it comes to education. He's also forged some very deep relationships in the sector and, of course, with his own employees, whom he regards as his family. And Rupesh has a really, really touching personal story. He made his own way to Australia as an international student many years ago, and that's really provided him with not only the platform, but the passion to change lives through education, which, of course, as we all know, is a great enabler to set us up for success in future. And of course, if I could do the same thing in Rupesh's own words, he has said that it's been a gratifying experience to build a global business that offers educational products all the way through the value chain. So from English courses to a certificate of master's programs to partnerships with universities like Victoria University and Swinburne. They offer internships and now, of course, very much so online study. So Rupesh, welcome to the panel today.
Thanks, Stella.
So with that in mind, I'm actually going to turn my attention to, of course, the three of you and Richard, who's joining us virtually from Melbourne. And we're going to get started with the panel. This is all about innovation and tech, and it's no wonder that we're doing so in a virtual setting these days. So we know, of course, companies have really used innovation and technology over the years to differentiate themselves with our consumers, many of us who are, of course, dialed in right now. But COVID's really accelerated this. It's really forced a lot of modernization and forced a ton of virtualization for us. And that's what we're going to really unpick today. So Anna, I'd like to start with you if I could. We all know King Furniture, but tell us a bit about King, but really what innovation has meant for you and your identity at this organization.
Well, King, you're absolutely right. We're probably more well known as basically selling, basically furniture. And look, we design. We're vertically integrated. We design basically here in Australia. We have industrial designers. We manufacture both here in Australia and overseas in our own factory with our own employees, and we retail through our own stores. And those stores actually stretch globally through, basically 6 countries. So, it's a full solution, but obviously with COVID, that has meant a lot of challenges. So in terms of innovation, we've had to rethink a lot of things. We've had to rethink the way we design. Normally, we would have designers who would actually go to our facility overseas and actually work with basically our people locally. Well, they haven't been able to do that. We've had to rethink basically our logistics chain and our just-in-time manufacturing, so we've had to adjust to that. We've had to then, right on the other end, we've had to look at our customer experience. So obviously with COVID, where they haven't necessarily been able to go into our stores. So we've had to rethink how we actually deal with that and how we give them the same customer experience.
And I look forward to hearing even more about that. So Rupesh, if I can, we're going to kind of pivot over to you for a moment. We obviously heard you guys have something like 8,000 students who you're supporting through the ECA. Can you maybe talk us through the journey that you've been on with ECA, but how really your business has evolved to support students today?
Yeah, thanks, Stella. With your introduction, I was an international student myself. So I've gone through that journey, and the city I come from in India is a holy city, Varanasi. And for students from that area, it's kind of impossible to even dream to go to US or Australia, for example. So I made my way through, and there's another long story how I came here. But during that journey, I realized that universities were doing great job actually, providing high quality education, and but there are more international students required. For example, I had to struggle to get accommodation. I had to provide pay slips and work experience, which I didn't have. Even after I graduated, I basically couldn't get a job. And that forced me to start my own business. And probably this is one of the best things happened, because I thought, what can I do? Even after I invested $60,000, $70,000, did my postgraduate, and still I couldn't get a job because I didn't have work experience, local work experience. So the only thing I knew at the time was, I had IT knowledge. So I started with a little IT training company, and from there we invested in acquiring colleges in English language school, vocational colleges. We have now a joint venture with universities, namely Swinburne, University of Canberra, Victoria University. And we also have our own postgraduate institutes, which we award our own degrees. So overall, what we do is we provide support to international students from day one when they land. So we invested in accommodation. We make sure they have everything, which I struggle. And all our graduates have opportunity to get work experience. So we do around 2,000 internship every year, and that helps students getting job. So that's how the ECA business started.
No, that's a great background and storyline. Thank you, Rupesh. So Richard, I'm actually gonna turn my attention to you virtually if I can. You obviously talked us through at length the sort of interlock and interplay between sustainability and manufacturing, and of course sustainability and innovation, and the critical role of innovation in your work at PACT. But perhaps if I could turn my attention to kind of the pressing matters right now with COVID. Can you talk us through how has COVID really impacted the sector overall, so manufacturing as an industry, and then how PACT has jumped on top of some of these challenges and really tackled it?
Yeah, I mean, PACT for us, it's been an extremely challenging period. I mean, we have 6,000 workers, of which 5,500 of those have to be coming to work every day and are providing products that are food or largely food and essential services. And so the key thing for us as an organisation was to make sure that our workers were safe first and foremost. And so we had to do a number of things around the protocols and things that we had within our organisation. But once we got through that, it then became about how do we react and how do we manage, firstly to the initial challenges that are in front of us. And we had a whole lot of issues around supply chain and particularly no different to any other company that had been exposed over a long period of time from sourcing raw materials and some of the other even finished goods from places like China. We had to rethink that whole supply chain, and we had to rethink how we did things, and we had to think about what the opportunities were for the community. One of the things that I think we did exceptionally well, and you talked about it in your intro, was that we went from we always had a business that made hand sanitizer. We probably sold about $1 million worth of hand sanitizer a year. At the peak, that went to $50 million worth of sales a month. And that was, we basically took on, and I think this goes to the nimbleness that manufacturing in countries, in Western countries particularly, have to show around being good at what they do, but being much more nimble and much more effective, and therefore can add value that way. And so whilst the hand sanitizer thing was a phenomena, it did actually create an environment and a culture within our organisation around trying to think how we were going to be different going forward, how we were going to be able to react to what is going to be a very different marketplace going forward. I think we're going to see, and the government is looking to promote modern manufacturing. And so therefore, what becomes our place in that? And increasingly, as we said, the transition to the circular economy becomes a piece of that. But just us taking control, and I think many companies had allowed themselves to move on a journey where you got yourself and found yourself in a place that you didn't necessarily want to be, and that being too exposed to supply chains that were too long, to raw material sourcing that didn't give you enough optionality. And so I think that has been the critical thing that we've learned through this period in terms of how we've managed and how we've diversified and adjusted to those changes, I think, Tara.
Thanks, Richard. And actually, we're going to pick up on the concept of supply chain that you were just talking through when I asked this question of Anna. So Anna, obviously, King is exceptionally well known as a retail brand. I'm sure many of us haven't really appreciated the fact that actually manufacturing is such a critical and a really integral part of your strategy and the business that you operate. So I guess in light of the current backdrop, everything from COVID to what's happening kind of geopolitically, how are you thinking through your kind of end-to-end supply chain this year, and what does that mean for your business right now?
Look, to be really honest, it has had an enormous impact, as you can obviously, following on from Richard's, we've had to really rethink what we do. COVID for us basically started to hit really early on in the piece. It started to hit basically when we've always had travel of our people to Shanghai. That's been part of our operation. Fortunately, we were able to get a lot of our operations people back here to Australia, which was fortunate. But then, come just after Chinese New Year, we were considering we do a large part of our manufacturing in our premises in Shanghai. We've all of a sudden had no workforce because they basically did not come back. They couldn't come back. So there for many, many weeks, it was all about, well, what do we do now? Fortunately, they slowly then started to come back, but it didn't happen to go back to full capacity for a long time. What COVID has done from us, right from the manufacturing footprint, is to quick track some of the plans that we've had. We're a growing company, so we basically, it became obvious, and we'd already been planning on actually looking at another footprint, a manufacturing footprint in another country. I can honestly say that that is something we've quick tracked, and hopefully late, into the next year, early next year, we'll have something there to actually talk about, but we've definitely quick tracked that. We've had to revisit our just-in-time manufacturing operations because obviously just-in-time assumes that you have containers to actually feed production into and that get loaded on a ship. So logistics becomes a big player. So it's actually to have warehousing capability to actually continue to have production. It's also made us to revisit, we've always manufactured in Australia, but we've actually revisiting increasing our footprint in Australia. Now, obviously, as Richard said, that actually requires assistance for us because it is about advanced manufacturing, and that's something that, we've started communication and conversations with government, but obviously we need to partner with them to do, to actually work on that. So obviously the manufacturing part, there's been a lot of rethinking.
So if I'm correct in sort of picking up from yourself and Richard's insights, there's a couple commonalities for me. Agility, pace, and of course the ability to innovate when faced with a pretty significant challenge around the world. So Rupesh, sort of picking up on that same sentiment, we're going to move to you for a second. Talk us through, how has this year just completely radically transformed what you guys do at ECA? And if you can, maybe talk us through one or two really critical standout moments for you this year in terms of how you now support and service your students.
Yeah, so when the pandemic, around March, what was happening, businesses like us, we were having, heavily dependent on international student market. Some of the businesses, they saw it, and started cutting down redundancies and so on. Now, one of the foundation of ECA, we treat all of our staff as a family. So first thing we had to do is we interacted with all our line managers, campus managers, college heads. We gave them assurance about the security of the job. We came up with a plan that everyone will take a little bit of hit, and we saved every single job. So we had minimum, job cuts. After that, our, second preference was around the student welfare because they were not in the campus. So overnight, we had a challenge to teach 8,000 students online. And we have been investing in technology So our actually IT systems, we have real dashboards which we manage student retention, attrition, progression, satisfaction. We have risk management. So that real data actually help us. And we had to do a lot of professional development for all our staff. We have never had all our staff working from home, so there was a lot of professional development activities there. Everyone had to connect 9:30 in the morning, 12:30, and 4:30. So we organized that. So first couple of months has been just making sure our day-to-day operation, our students are very well engaged, and all that took place. And very proud to share our student retention and student satisfaction engagement is much better than what we had when it was face-to-face operation in the campus. Secondly, what we had to do is make sure what do we do for 2021. And I always think about the people first and how I'm going to retain all these jobs. So we started investing in online education, domestic education. We come up with women empowerment program to support migrants and refugees, and women who lose confidence during while they're doing the most important job in their life, raising kids. So we come up with those programs. We entered in domestic market. Now we have a platform which now have around 370,000 online enrollments. And we also looked at the problems in the industry. As Anna mentioned, the challenge brought manufacturing. The labor cost in Australia is so high. So we then invested, and our sister company now have partnership with the University of Sydney, and we're doing some advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing for the industry, where we're doing dental plants, we're doing some of the advanced manufacturing in aviation and so on. So we looked at all the problems, we looked at supporting our students, and technology has just fast-tracked everything for us. And it's been, overall, we're doing okay, and 2021 is looking better for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Rupesh. So again, very similar sentiment to both Richard and Anna in terms of what's happened the last few months. So Anna, I'm going to turn again to you if I can. Obviously, we know that we've had lockdowns around the country, around the world. There's been social restrictions. Much of this is really changing how consumers are behaving, both when it comes to themselves, but also with their retail and shopping habits. I'm the first to admit shopping online has skyrocketed in the Booker household. So how has King adapted to this? What kind of customer journeys and digital customer journeys have you created? But secondly, I have a two-part question here. Obviously, we need to measure success when it comes to digital and technology. So how are you doing that at King?
Well, this is a really interesting question, because with COVID and actually having bricks and mortar stores and what we're known for, and we had bricks and mortar stores basically in 6 jurisdictions. Obviously, COVID has, we've had lockdowns, then we've had stores reopening, then we've gone back into lockdowns. It's just been what a journey this year has been. So obviously, we've had to focus on how we give our customers that same experience without going into a store. So look, we've engaged a lot of measures. Obviously, we've had to be very careful with social distancing where our stores have remained opening. And that's meant we've been very vigilant in making sure that we've very closely monitored that. We've actually set up, in the early days, we basically set up by appointment, so that we actually had people coming into our stores by appointment, which is something we've never done. But we've even gone beyond that. We've had FaceTime consulting that we've introduced. We've actually created a virtual showroom. And I think that that's taught us that, basically people can have the same experience by actually virtually going into a showroom and being led through a showroom and being able to do a FaceTime consultation, with our team. So that's made a huge difference. And then following on from that, obviously, we've had to enhance our website and our digital experience. And that's meant actually really ramping up our online presence. We've been very agile. Overnight we've had to redeploy people who've had, mainly it's our retail staff they couldn't work for us, but obviously we wanted to retain as many jobs as possible. And so we were fortunate that we could actually redeploy them into the online space. So there's been huge, huge changes there, and we're continuing to make those changes.
So I want to turn my attention to Richard. So Richard, in your presentation, you briefly touched and gave a very great plug for HSBC. But if we can, be remiss of me as an HSBC person not to flag this. But talk us through, if you can, a little bit more detail. How have some of your partners, not just HSBC, but other partners, really helped PAC transform during this time of sort of extreme change?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great point you raise, and I mean, look, I think I did deliberately call out the example of the joint venture between ourselves, Cleanaway, and Asahi, because I think increasingly, if you're going to make substantial changes like this, you need to do these things in partnership. You can't go these things alone. You have to recognise and very clearly understand where your skill sets are, where you can add value to the change that you're making, but then work out who are the best partners to work with you. And I gave that example because I think it's an example of obviously three very, very large companies, and in fact, in the case of both of those, in fact, bigger than ourselves, but where we can actually join together. And I think touching on that whole relationship, and as you said, working through with other partners like the banking group, you can't expect to make a change that's going to cost you somewhere in the range of $500 million over a 5-year period without knowing that you have the support of some of the partners, and obviously one of those, and is a very important partner for us, is HSBC. And so, and I think to that point, it's also about looking at strategies and looking at things that are different. If you're going to make change that's going to be different to your organisation, how do you look at every part? Look at how your funding structures, look at how you do things that are going to be different to what you're doing today. And so, increasingly we're working with HSBC around some really interesting things. And, and I think green lending is going to be an area where, we're going to see a lot more of, and it should be. It should be promoting and sponsoring and giving some value to companies that are looking to change their footprint, and banks working with those companies, and both parties benefiting from that. So I think, I think we're very clear that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where we did many of these things by ourselves, partners play a huge part. And in fact, if you're going to make substantial change and substantial directional change in your organisation, you will not do that successfully alone.
Thanks, Richard. So Rupesh, obviously big philosophy, or big part of, I guess, the premise of innovation and technology and these topics today is, test, learn, iterate. So the premise of agility. In light of that, feedback, of course, we know is very critical. So what kind of feedback have your students been sharing with you and your organization? And if we do a bit of forward-looking gazing, how are you taking that feedback, and how is it adapting your business for 2021? What do they want?
Yeah, great question, Tala. So one of the things we have is we have academic board, and we always have a student representative in our academic board. And so the first semester after March, the feedback was, face-to-face, students can sit in the class, listen to lecturers for a couple of hours, not a problem. So we actually, when you're doing online learning and a lecturer, and I will say it was remote learning for most of the universities, so a student had to sit 2-3 hours and listen to the lecturers, and that's the feedback. And we implemented that. We break our assignment and tasks into little activities, 15-minute activities, break, work group. So we had to do a lot of these changes. One other part is very important. Any education provider, whether it's universities or education businesses like us, we can only be successful if at the end of the day we are making sure students are getting jobs. And for that, we have actually invested in our internship and job placement. We have a large division to do that. And there is a significant need, which I personally see, where universities and the industry engagement is the key. So one of the other projects we are currently working in making sure Universities have multi-million-dollar facilities. They're very good. They have top researchers. But it's just that awareness to the industry leaders, and talking to Anna, during this panel discussions, I had some really good interaction. These multi-million-dollar facilities are available to industries, and there are great research, there are government grants, and there's a lot, we talk nowadays about manufacturing in Australia, but one of the key there is industries' problems need to be understood by the university. There is a engagement need to be there. So we are playing that role right now and making sure that all the research and industry are all synced and aligned. And the result of that will be, we want our research students to be sponsored by industries, and by paying $25,000, $30,000, industry will have access to top researchers. So that's one area, for 2021. It's our big focus, and our current project is going really well in partnership with the University of Sydney. We've got some industries engagement happening there as well. So this is all planned, and we understand our customer really well. We take our feedback from our recruitment partners on the ground, and we make sure all those suggestions are implemented, and we have a proper governance to monitor those changes and implementation.
Thanks, Rupesh, and thank you all for addressing the questions I certainly had. I now want to turn our attention to questions that the audience has. So folks, just a reminder, you can use the Q&A functionality on the webinar to ask us questions. I'm fielding them live right now on the iPad. So one has come through that I'm gonna throw out to the panel here, and perhaps maybe a quick insight from each of you would be helpful. What's been the biggest change in customer expectations for your products or services? Maybe Anna, just if I can start with you first, that would be great.
Look, I think the biggest expectations is that they actually need to get information. We need to, as I stated, we need to make sure that they can still have that customer experience even if they don't go into a store. And I think the key driver is communication. They need to know that basically where things are at, what can and can't happen, when, with what they can buy, what the lead times are, when deliveries will be. So I think the key driver for us is really that's their expectation in this, with where we've been at.
Excellent. Any other thoughts, Rupesh or Richard?
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Richard.
Go,
All right.
Please.
So I think it's very important what Anna said. The changes which due to the pandemic, it's not going to be business as usual, in future, and we must respond quickly and in a very dynamic way to support. Nowadays, the young generation, what we have also seen actually during this is they are pretty happy to study online, and surprisingly, the student satisfaction went up. So they're all using technology, smartphones. They don't want to wait. The young generation, we noticed, they don't have patience. If they don't get response very, very quickly, then you're losing your customer. So I think new era has already started probably 10 years earlier, and we all need to adapt to those changes pretty quickly.
So I'm actually going to say, in the interest of time, I'm conscious we're almost out of time. I have a rapid fire point for each of you. And Richard, I'm going to throw to you first on the other side. It's if there was one takeaway for this group of people who are on today's webinar, what would you like the audience to take away as a key message?
I think start big in terms of the vision, and then bring that back down to what is something that you can bite off as an organization. But I think the important thing is to think about what could be the disruptor to your business and how technology can change that for you, and then bring it to your scale.
Great advice, Rupesh. Piece of advice for our audience.
The way I have always operated in our organization is we look at the problem in the market or industry or students, and we come up with a solution very quickly. So, and where I come from, there is always a chaos. So we perform better when there is a chaos we are quite used to. And I think that resilience is very, very important to succeed in any of this kind of environment.
Resilience, think big. Anna, what's your takeaway?
Agility. We need to react and implement changes really quickly. We just don't have time. And I think that has to be part of the DNA of the organisation, because that's the expectation. You never know what's around the corner, but what you need to know is if you have a team around you that can react and adjust, that's really your biggest asset.
I love it. So we've got think big, we have resilience, we have agility. It's great key messages. So with that in mind, I'd like to send a very, very heartfelt thank you on behalf of HSBC to all of our panelists, to Rupesh, to Richard, to Anna. Your insights have been invaluable, and I'm sure those on the call would agree with us. So just a reminder for everyone, those of you who had follow-up, who had questions that we didn't have time to address, sorry, we ran out of time. We will absolutely be coming back to you and closing the loop with some feedback and getting back to you on that. As Steve Hughes, our head of commercial banking, mentioned at the onset of today's discussion, this is the first in a wider series of initiatives that HSBC is hosting around the topic of innovation. This is our topic well into 2021, because we know, as everyone has said, the world is fast changing. So stay tuned on our website to get, obviously, the recording and to hear more about these upcoming events. We, of course, as always, to test, learn, to iterate, and to learn new things, we welcome your feedback. So please email us, share your views. We want to hear from you. So again, I'd like to just extend a huge thanks to all of you for dialing in, and of course to our very esteemed panel and speakers today. So thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.